Okay, in this session we're going to talk about the new library that's in Camtasia 2018. It's one of the feature improvements in 2018 that we can actually see, touch, and use. The library is actually one of my favorite new features of the couple that are in 2018. So the first thing that we'll kind of notice is that the library now has its own tab on the ribbon. In previous versions, you had to go to the media bin, and then there was a tab over here to get to your library. Now you can access it directly by clicking on the tab here or pressing the R hotkey no matter what tab you happen to be on. The library is really great way to reduce your editing and production time by storing, of course, frequently used assets that we can then utilize across all projects. My main goal for this basic overview here is to just kind of show you what's new and then give you some tips and tricks on how we might be able to utilize it to its best potential. So adding and using assets works the same as it did basically in Camtasia 9, and I'll use that as the kind of reference. But here are some of the improvements that are made. First of all, from the library drop-down menu, you can now have multiple libraries to organize your assets into. And right off the bat, TechSmith provides a pretty nice selection of images, motion graphics, music, and stuff like that in a library called Camtasia 2018. And this gets installed by default when you upgrade to 2018 or install it. And you can add additional user libraries, including the option to import your Camtasia 9 libraries. Now, notice that it says needs upgrade here. This is because the 2018 libraries and Camtasia 9 libraries are not backward compatible, meaning that Camtasia 9 assets can be imported and used in 2018, but assets exported from 2018 will not import or work in Camtasia 9. If you click this, theoretically, what should happen is you should be able to click the Upgrade Now button, and it will look for Camtasia 9 libraries on your computer, and it will pull them into a new library. I've actually been kind of afraid to try this because there were some potential problems that were posted in the community forums. So as an alternative, I'm basically just exporting my Camtasia 9 libraries and then importing them into 2018. And we'll cover importing and stuff like that in just a bit. So I'm going to upgrade later. It might be worth noting that if you go to Help and check for updates, I'm going to go ahead and let it check for updates. And it tells me that there is a new version out, 2018.0.1. And if I go check the version history, what it does say is that it fixed bugs with library upgrading. So hopefully that's good news. You'll see that this minor update is all about the bugs. So that's pretty much the scoop there. And they actually put this update out less than a month after releasing. That's just kind of something to be aware of. I'll test this later, but like I say, for right now, my basic strategy is pretty much just to export my stuff from Camtasia 9 and then import it into 2018. I also kind of look at that and a little exercise, if you will, as a way of kind of house cleaning. I have a lot of stuff in my Camtasia 9 library, and a lot of it is stuff I was just playing with or trying, and what the heck, I'll save this to my library, but I never end up using it. So the other good aspect of kind of exporting your stuff manually and then re-importing it, I think, is definitely the fact that I can very carefully kind of pick and choose what it is I want to bring back in. I'll cover creating and managing user libraries in a minute, but first let's kind of look at what's new in general for any given library that you want to look at. So in the one that installs automatically, At the top level, we see that we still have folders just like we did before, but if I open this up, we're going to see probably one of the biggest improvements, and that is the ability to add subfolders. I've been requesting the ability to have subfolders to organize my library for the longest time, and finally it's kind of a reality. This is extremely handy if you think of the fact that the library is essentially a collection of folders, just like you have on your hard drive. Well, on my hard drive, I store a lot of assets and audio tracks and video clips and things like that in a folder called my media library. So I go here to find stuff. But at the same time, I also use subfolders to keep things organized within my window structure. Well, now we have the same kind of capability that we can organize assets that are available at our fingertips right inside of Camtasia. So for me, this is really kind of a handy dandy thing. And I guess I'll just mention that in Camtasia 9, if you opened up the icons folder, you saw all of the icons, right? All the buildings, all the business, all the education. And so subfolders let us, of course, organize things into a little more coherent fashion. But here's the other thing that I like. Let's go ahead and drill down into a folder where the assets actually reside. And now what I can see is a thumbnail of what that particular asset actually is. I can't tell you how much time I have wasted in the past having to double click to preview an asset just to figure out, oh, exactly what it is. The thumbnails, while they aren't perfect in helping me identify all the assets in the library, I certainly get an infinitely better visual indication of, oh yeah, I might want to use house 3 instead of house 2, for example, without having to preview them. So I absolutely love this. And the types of assets are indicated here. This is an image. And you also get thumbnails. Let's drill down into one of the other default directories here. Oh, motion backgrounds. You also get thumbnails for any video clips. Now, not as easy to tell exactly what a video clip might be based on a thumbnail. And I think this is probably just like a first frame kind of a thing. But basically, I do still get a much better idea of what that video clip actually is. Floating boxes. Oh yeah, it's that one. I know what this is because I've used it and I've seen it and things like that. And again, I can use the normal library functions to double click and preview it, but still, it just makes it a whole bunch nicer. So I love the thumbnails and the ability to have folders. You can create new user libraries by clicking the drop down and going to Create New Library. And your options here then are to basically give it a name. Let's start with just maybe a test one. And a little feature here is that you can create a blank library, or you do have the option to import assets that exist in any of your other libraries. Right? So that's kind of nice. I'm going to just go ahead and create a blank one here. And again, all of the ways that we can import media into a library basically still are true. So you can click the big green button here, search for assets on your hard drive, and those can be all the standard media types: TREC files, images, video clips, audio files, any file format that's accepted. You can jam right into a library. You can click the little plus button here or use Control-Shift-I, which basically gives you the option to do the same thing, import media. There's also an option to download more assets that we'll talk about in a little bit. But again, basically it's the same way that we are used to adding assets. So let me just grab these two items here, and let's say I want to use this or make it available for use in other projects. So I'm just going to select them. I'll go ahead and right click and add to library. So what it does is, since I'm selecting stuff on the timeline, it's going to create a group. This could be maybe welcome to library or whatever. But then I can also choose which of my custom libraries I want to go ahead and put it into. So we'll just put that in our test library. And now we have this asset available, and of course I can drop it anytime I want onto the timeline in any project. So that's all library goodness. The other default library that you'll get besides the 2018 one here is one called, very cleverly enough, default. And it is basically empty. It really is just one that they created for you to start adding or importing your own kind of media. If we right click here, we get a couple of options. One is to import a zipped library. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And let's just grab one here. This is called a libzip file. And when we go look at some of the other assets, the additional assets that you can download, or even assets that I create and I provide to you guys, I'm generally going to be creating them in a libzip file. So go ahead and open that, and we'll put that in our default library and import. So what that does is it takes whatever is packaged up and kind of gives us the ability to just import it to create new subdirectories. So let's say I wanted to create a subdirectory of different kinds of arrows or something like that. You right click and create a new folder. So I could create a subfolder called, oh, I don't know, maybe straight arrows. Something like that. I could create one called curvy. Anything that makes sense from an organizational standpoint. And then to kind of put assets into it, you notice I already have some here. You just click on them and drag them into whatever folder you want. Another way that you can do that is if you right click, say I imported some assets, no matter what library I imported them into, you can also copy them and put them in other libraries that you have. So this is basically just going to put it into the library itself. So let's try that. I'm going to copy it to my test library. But you'll notice that it doesn't really give you the ability to copy to a subfolder. So at some point you're going to need to maybe move stuff, dragging and dropping into subfolders. So it's kind of a little thing to be aware of. Creating new libraries, one of the things that I'm really kind of thinking about and recommending is to have some kind of strategy, just like we do on our hard disk when we're going to organize our assets. So creating new libraries specifically for certain assets that we like to use frequently, or another idea might be to create a library if you're working with, say, a client and putting all the assets for that particular client, like their lower thirds or any other intros, outros that you've created specifically for clients, into their own library. So that would make it very easy to just get to stuff pretty much right off the gate, right on the fly, and probably make life a lot easier. That's one of the main things that I kind of recommend, is that you think about a couple of things. Look at the assets that you currently own, like graphics, images, video clips, audio files, stuff like that. And if there are individual items that you use frequently enough to want to keep them very close at hand, then I put them in the library. As a general rule of thumb, I'm not really looking to go to my hard disk and import everything, the entire kitchen sink, into the library. It has potential to just kind of slow things down in the software, and in reality, if you think about it, it might make things harder to find, and I'll give you a couple of tips on that in a minute, than it would be worth. So my rule of thumb is that if I'm using something maybe more than twice, probably going to put it in the library. Now, deciding on a top level directory structure, let me open up one of my libraries. This is Cam Library, so this is one of my products, and this is kind of how it gets installed. I have lower thirds, overlays, things like that. So I've thought about the top level directories here, one for lower thirds. Oh, okay, well, if I want the lower thirds from my libraries here, I can just go ahead and jump into this folder, and then I have all of those things available. You might consider using a library and or folders for, specific kinds of components. So within the libraries you can create folders for asset categories, I guess, which is basically the best way to put this. You can additionally add subfolders, like I mentioned, into subfolders. So we kind of covered that. So you should be able to get a pretty good directory structure if you think a little bit about how you want to have things organized. Now, you don't have to stress too much over that, because what you can do is you can just kind of start adding stuff. So maybe even in the default directory here, I added some arrows, and I don't know, let's just add maybe something else. Let's import some media. Let's grab a couple of audio files. Okay, I like those. I'm going to put those in here. So we'll put those in here, and you can kind of on the fly, maybe over time, start to kind of get stuff organized. So here, for my default, maybe what I want to do is create a new folder called audio. Or better yet, let's call it music. And you'll notice that I created a subfolder, and that really wasn't what I wanted. So you can drag and drop stuff. So now I can grab these, maybe use the control key to select a couple, and then at that point again you're going to have to drag stuff around a bit. But the punchline there is that you can kind of create some of this stuff on the fly without going through too much extraneous planning and stuff like that. It's pretty easy to move stuff around, maybe use the default library here to just get stuff in, and then again use any of you can right click and either copy to other libraries or move to. If you kind of screw something up or whatever, you can actually delete stuff, but here's kind of your caveat. So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to say delete. And once something is in the library, if you want to delete it, you have to keep in mind that if you've used that asset in previous projects, deleting it's going to break that project in the sense that Camtasia won't know where that asset is anymore, where the file actually lives anymore. So you just want to be a little bit careful of that, be mindful. If you do delete something and it breaks a project, it doesn't break it completely, but it will ask you where to find the asset. So you can copy and move stuff around, and you can sort by name, by type, by date added, and reverse order by date that it was used. Sometimes if you have a lot of stuff in there and oh gosh, I just used that thing, where is it? That's just a quick way to get it to pop up. And the other thing worth noting is that now you can actually search the library. So you can search by whatever the name of the asset is. So my other tip for staying organized is to be very mindful when you add something to the library of giving it the most descriptive name that you probably can, because you'll be able to search for it. So let me show you a little trick here. I'm going to go ahead and search for LT. And in this search, you can search in the current library, But the nice thing is you can also search across all libraries. So here's the little trick I did there. These are lower thirds. So all I did was I added a suffix. I guess it could be a prefix, but I like to, see the description first. But this suffix here called LT is for lower third. So I can go through my library and I can add this suffix to every lower third I have in any library I have. I'll just right click and rename. Hit the end key and put in an LT. So now when I do my search, and you get recent searches that you've done, it will show me the new ones that I've just kind of added that to. You will want to know that to clear the search, in other words, to get back to everything, you got to click the little X to clear your search. Okay, and now I'm back to all my stuff. Another thing that is basically new is that if you click this button here that says download more assets, that's going to take you to what formerly was the online library for TechSmith assets. And in Camtasia 9 you could get more lower thirds and stuff like that. Well, you can here too, and that's kind of the good news. The bad news is that to access everything that they have available on this site, 500,000 professional assets, you got to pay. And it's like $199 a year, which quite frankly, in the realm of sites like this, and they actually use a site called Storyblocks for their videos and images. And then a lot of you may be familiar with a service called Audio Blocks from the same company for audio files. So here's kind of the scoop. Yes, you can get some new assets. So for example, let's go look at images and let's go look at icons. Okay, if we go back to the original 2018 library, icons, okay, well I already got some. What you'll notice is that there are some categories here: business, education, insurance, interface. If we go to the online library, well, there are a couple of other ones that you can actually download. Here's the one that we saw before. It's already included. The buildings, remember those guys? So some of these are included in the default one, but here's one called arrows. And what you do is you basically click to download, and what that's going to do is it's going to let you save, again, this thing called a libzip file. Here it is, arrows. If you look at the icon, that's kind of what it looks like. And to install it, all you do is double click it. Okay, so that's kind of fun. But what will happen is you'll come to a point in these. If you hover over it and it says download, you're good to go. You can download it. If you hover over it and it says buy subscription, then you got to buy yourself a subscription to get these. Right? And, there is indeed a pretty massive amount of stuff, but it's basically just a resource site that gives you the same kinds of things you could get from Storyblocks and Audio Blocks, except for things like intros. So let's go to intros real quick. These are specifically Camtasia assets. So again, these are going to be a libzip file, and you can import them like we just did. Well, you get a certain number of them. Remember, look for the download, but you'll get to a point, I think it's right about here. And if you want these assets, then you'll have to pay for them. And that comes with the subscription. So I'd like to see TechSmith add like, I don't know, a couple hundred of these things, to crank these out, because they're nice. They have the quick properties. They're super easy to modify and all that good stuff. But what do we get? We get, you get 20 and change, which I don't think is like a huge number of assets to hope for. They say they're going to be adding more, and I would think that with a yearly subscription that they'll be adding more of these custom assets. But let's just preview one. Let's look at it. Okay, that's literally nothing more than a couple lines of text with behavior on it, right? So what I might do is I'll just steal the design, build my own kind of thing. But that's just me. So it could be, a good source of inspiration if you don't want to fork over the bucks for it. One thing that I'll mention is that under audio, you do get a really big library from Audio Blocks. So I guess one of the benefits is that with a full subscription, you also get a nice big chunk of good audio tracks.